Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into something truly fascinating. We're breaking down a profound historical lecture by Dr. Shairak Akil, which explores the deep, moral, and historical significance of the events at Karbala. We're going to unpack this narrative together, keeping an objective, analytical focus on the source text to examine exactly how the speaker frames the monumental legacy of Imam Hussain. There is a ton of rich history and powerful rhetoric to cover here, so let's get right into it.
Okay, let's dive into this. The lecture grabs our attention right out of the gate with this incredibly powerful line of poetry by Hafiz. Why has the world mistaken mere breathing for life? Dr. Akil uses this verse to establish a deeply solemn and captivating tone from the very start. It immediately forces us to rethink the true meaning of life, suggesting that just existing is fundamentally different from a life lived with purpose, courage, and ultimately, sacrifice.
Which brings us to Section 1. The legacy of sacrifice. What's absolutely crucial to grasp here is that the source doesn't present Karbala as some sudden, isolated clash. Not at all. It's framed as the grand climax of a deeply rooted historical continuum. Dr. Akil draws this direct line through time. He points out that this tradition of ultimate sacrifice actually began roughly 3,000 years prior. Think about that scale, when Prophet Abraham was willing to offer his son Ishmael. The lecture then traces this lineage straight down to the 4th year of Hijra with the birth of Imam Hussain, before reaching its ultimate devastating peak in 61 AH at the Battle of Karbala. So, according to the speaker, Hussain was really fulfilling a destiny of sacrifice set in motion millennia before he was even born.
And building on that profound destiny, the speaker really highlights the immaculate upbringing of Imam Hussain. Raised right in the lap of Ali and Fatima and guided closely by the Prophet himself during those early years, Hussain is described as having a completely spotless character. And here's a fascinating detail Dr. Akil points out. Hussein's moral standing was so pristine, so universally recognized, that even his fiercest political rival, Yazid, literally couldn't find a single character flaw or sin to use against him.
Moving right along to Section 2, the rise of monarchy.
So, if Hussein was so universally respected, what actually triggered the conflict? Well, the source points to a massive seismic shift in the political landscape of the Islamic world as the root of the impending tragedy. And this brilliantly illustrates the stark contrast the speaker draws. On one hand, you have the early caliphates, the leadership of Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, Ali, and Hassan, which Dr. Akil describes as systems rooted in merit, mutual consent, and piety. But on the other hand, you see the stark shift under Yazid, the sudden imposition of a hereditary monarchy, a demand for forced allegiance, and a regime ruled entirely by fear and coercion. The speaker makes it clear this wasn't just a change in leadership, it was a fundamental upending of Islamic governance.
And according to the lecture, Imam Hussain possessed this far-reaching vision that immediately recognized the catastrophic dangers of this shift. He warned that the caliphate was turning into a monarchy. The speaker argues that Hussain, given his lineage and moral weight, simply couldn't accept or endorse a ruler devoid of piety who was seizing power through pure coercion. His absolute refusal to pledge allegiance was, therefore, a deeply principled stand against systemic corruption.
Now things start to escalate. Section 3. Betrayal and the siege.
This principled refusal sets the stage for a really dramatic escalation. Let's walk through exactly how the source describes this trap closing in around the city of Kufa. It's basically a 3-step process. Step 1. The people of Kufa send thousands, literally thousands of urgent letters pleading for Hussain to come and lead them against Yazid's tyranny. Hussain responds to their call. Step 2. Yazid catches wind of this and deploys a notoriously ruthless governor Ibn Ziyad to crush the uprising using fear. Step 3. As Hussain approaches, he's intercepted by Yazid's massive army. The Kufans completely abandon him, and his camp is cornered, with their access to the life-saving Euphrates River totally cut off.
I want to slow down for just a moment here to honor the sheer gravity of how Dr. Akil describes this specific part of the siege, because while the threat of swords and arrows was imminent, the speaker notes that the true psychological torment was the absolute agony of thirst. Just imagine the unimaginable pain described in the lecture, Hussain having to watch his own family, the women and the young children, writhing in the severe heat, crying out for water, while a massive army blocks the river just out of reach. It's a harrowing detail that underscores the extreme cruelty of the siege.
This brings us to the morning of the 10th of Muharram, Section 4, the ultimate stand.
Cornered and betrayed, Hussain is left with only one choice, leading to a shocking asymmetry on the battlefield.
So the crucial point is this devastating number, 72. On one side, Yazid's heavily armed, well-supplied army numbers in the thousands. On the other side stands Imam Hussain with a mere 72 companions and family members. And out of those 72, only 24 even had horses. They were massively outnumbered and facing certain death on the plains of Karbala.
Yet, before a single sword is drawn, Dr. Akil details how Hussein rode out to address the enemy ranks, many of whom were the exact same Kufans who had written him those letters. He laid out a pristine, rhetorical defense, logically forcing them to confront their own actions. He challenged them. Had he ever broken a promise, missed a prayer, usurped anyone's rights, killed anyone unjustly? By cleanly proving his absolute innocence, the speaker notes that Hussein completely dismantled any moral justification the opposing army had for attacking him.
The response to this defense is steeped in tragic irony. Out of sheer terror of their ruthless commanders, the Kufans flatly denied ever writing the letters, just completely denied it. But the source highlights a fascinating, really powerful glimmer of moral courage in this dark moment. An enemy commander named Hur bin Yazid is so moved by Hussein's truth that he drops his shield, rides over to Hussein's camp, begs for forgiveness, and actually defects to join the 72. He chose certain death for the sake of standing with the truth.
What follows, according to the lecture, is a sequential, heart-wrenching loss. The speaker maintains a very solemn respect as he describes Hussein's companions, his brothers, and his sons, legendary figures like Ali Akbar and Abbas, taking to the battlefield. Despite being parched with thirst and vastly outnumbered, the source describes them fighting with an unparalleled, almost superhuman bravery, pushing the enemy back repeatedly, until, one by one, they all fall as martyrs.
Finally, the source brings us to the harrowing climax. Imam Hussain is left entirely alone on the battlefield. Dr. Akil impartially narrates the severe physical and emotional toll of these final moments. Having just watched his entire family fall, Hussain himself is surrounded. He fights valiantly, but eventually sustains severe arrow and spear wounds, ultimately sacrificing his life. The lecture doesn't shy away from the brutality of this moment, cementing the ultimate physical cost of his defiance.
But the physical death is not where the story ends. The speaker encapsulates the core of Hussein's moral victory with a chillingly powerful concept. You can raise my head on a spear, but you cannot make me pledge allegiance on your hand. Think about that. Even in death, even facing ultimate desecration, Hussein's will remained entirely unbroken. He never, ever bowed to tyranny.
And that unbreakable spirit leads us into our final segment, Section 5, An Enduring Message.
Let's move to this next point and see how this builds. The lecture lifts us from the tragic history of the battlefield into a lasting legacy that is echoed through the centuries. Dr. Akil quotes the famous Persian poetry by Khwaja Moinuddin Chishti. The poem basically declares that Hussein is the true king, the true emperor, because by giving his head but never giving his hand to Yazid in allegiance, he achieved a monumental victory of the spirit over the sword. History remembers the man who was martyred, while the empire of the man who killed him ultimately crumbled.
Now, what's really interesting about this is how the speaker brings this historical narrative crashing right into the present day. Citing the renowned philosopher Allama Iqbal, Dr. Akil contrasts the singular, unwavering courage of Imam Hussain with today's global landscape. The lecture points out that despite having vast resources, massive populations, and huge organizations today, the world desperately lacks the kind of pristine moral leadership and uncompromising courage that Hussein embodied.
Which brings us to the end of our analysis and leaves us with a critical thought to ponder. We've explored the timeline, the political shifts, the brutal siege, and the ultimate sacrifice, exactly as outlined by Dr. Akil. The source challenges us not just to remember history, but to actually learn from it. So how does Imam Hussein's timeless message of standing against tyranny and absolutely refusing to bow to injustice apply to the struggles of our world today? It's a powerful question and one for sure worth reflecting on. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and I'll see you next time.